This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 25 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Discussions at the Roundtable. I'm your host, Noah Ballmer, and today I'm excited to welcome Professor Marom Bikson to the show. Professor Bikson has taught at the City College of New York for over 20 years, where he's the co-director of the Neural Engineering Group. He's an expert on the effects of electricity on the human body and is a published author in numerous scientific journals and has been awarded several patents. Professor Bikson holds a Ph.D. in Biomedical Engineering from my own alma mater, Case Western Reserve University. Professor Bikson, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Let's jump into it. Your work as a biomedical engineer and scientist is focused on electricity. What, pardon the pun, sparked your interest in this specific niche?
I have always been interested in how the body generates electricity. For example, we can measure brain waves or waves from the heart. And then I became interested in how you can use electricity to change how the body works. So maybe you could think of a defibrillator, but now there are more nuanced technologies that can be used, for example, in the brain to change how people think or how they feel. And so those are, for me, being able to interface with the brain, to read and write, as we say, is a very fulfilling topic to work on.
Sure. And how did you, transition that into a career, really? You've been doing for over a decade now of expert witnessing. How did you first get started in expert witnessing? Were you actively pursuing it, or did you get a call out of the blue?
It was out of the blue, and I think maybe that's how it happens to a lot of professors who don't think of this as an alternative topic they could pursue. Another professor I knew was contacted on a topic that he was not an expert on, and he then deferred those lawyers to me. And that's something I've done to other colleagues now as well. So it's a way to sort of, pay forward that referral and also make sure that people who are reaching you are getting to the best possible experts.
Sure. Let's talk about that very first engagement, or, your first few. What was that phone call like? What kinds of questions did they ask you?
I don't know how much I remember that first phone call. And I would say that I certainly have more experience now in understanding what the lawyers who I'm speaking to are trying to gain out of that phone call from me. And so I would say now I understand that, obviously I think they're partially assessing your ability to just communicate clearly. You might be, on the stand, and you want to make sure that you are articulate and you're precise. Sure. I think that often obviously there's a specific matter at hand, and it may be in your topic area, but you haven't really had a chance to research the details. Let's say it's a patent matter, they've sent you the patent, and so there's sort of an understanding as well that you want to be able to demonstrate some insight into the topic, but you have to be very upfront that you haven't actually started the research as well. So I think there's a bit of that aspect where they're at that point they're really interviewing you, right, and they're assessing whether you're a good fit or not, and that's what you want to communicate to them to let them make that assessment.
During that vetting process, you mentioned that sometimes you might not know everything about, some very specific topic. Is that always a unsolvable problem? Can you clear that obstacle by doing some research into that? Or do you pretty much have to be an expert on every aspect of the engagement?
You do not need to be an expert in every aspect of it. I think you want to have certain core expertise. So I do a lot of work on medical devices. Now, there are many types of medical devices. However, I understand principles that are universal across medical device regulation and testing. Sure. And clinical trials. And so that gives me some breadth. I think it's very important, at least for me, when I'm being vetted, to be very upfront with the people about what my expertise and what it isn't, because that is going to come into play, right? I am going to be represented as an expert, and I'm going to be challenged hard, potentially, right, by the opposition on my expertise. And so Sure. I find it very useful to be upfront to let them know what I have done and what I haven't done, because that is going to become a factor if things, escalate.
As an expert, how do you maintain and augment your expertise? Are you always trying to learn new things and more about things, or do you kind of focus really hard on your very specific niche?
Um, I enjoy a lot of the consulting because in some ways it lets you expand your breadth. I think as a research professor at university, you have a few projects or areas that you tend to juggle. Often, when you're consulting, you get to move into maybe a slightly adjacent domain. And so you do kind of stretch yourself a little bit that way. Another way that you stretch yourself is the way you may be providing expert support is not the way you would typically conduct research or the way you typically develop technology. So you are learning from the lawyers, their language. You're learning from the lawyers, the process, the legal process that you are engaging with. You're learning from the lawyers the type of documents that and the style of documents that you should be producing. So there's an educational process as well there. And as you know, depending on the matter, those rules may be changing. And I mean, you're never going to know as much as the lawyers, right? And they
Sure.
tell you to say when if you're being deposed or something, I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot answer legal questions. But the lawyers did tell me this, and the lawyers did tell me that, and that is guiding how I am providing my expertise.
So it's not just being an expert in your field, but it's being an expert on being an expert.
I think having been through the process now several times, I can provide more value had I just been sort of a technical blank slate. At the end of the day, you are a technical expert, and that's what you're being asked to do. But I
Sure.
think there is the aspect of communication. There's the aspect of being a team member that all come into play.
Let's talk about preparation a little bit. When you have a new engagement, what are the techniques that you feel really work best for preparing you for a deposition or a case or even a report? Do you like, for example, mock cross examinations?
Certainly, if I'm going to be deposed, my experience has been that the lawyers will work with you to prepare you, and the amount of preparation may depend on the stakes of the matter. So it may be a matter of it's one day where they walk through some mock questions with you, or I've been involved in a matter where it was almost a month of not all the time, but regular preparation. Um, so they're trying to they trust that you know your expertise in your technical domain, but they want to make sure that you understand that the process that you're about to be engaged in, which can be adversarial, right? And
Sure.
and it may be a style that we're not particularly as scientists or technologists, we may not be particularly used to that. Frankly, I think it makes us a little bit uncomfortable sometimes to be engaging with someone who, we have nothing against them, but now all of a sudden we're thrust into an adversarial sort of role with them, or they
Sure.
are making an adversarial, I should say. And so again, the preparation for that, to speak clearly, to not speak beyond your report, to avoid being led in a direction that you cannot defend later on. So certainly for depositions, there's preparation, and then obviously in preparing reports, I've never had the experience where I've sort of been left off in the wind by myself, and I come back a month later with some document. The lawyers are responsible, but also I am responsible to understand what the goals are,
Sure.
what the deliverables are, to understand what the facts are. And again, even though I'm commenting on a particular technical aspect, that is in the context of some strategy that they have. And so I'm not going to start like randomly talking about some technical thing that I find very interesting. Usually there are certain, I think it's always very, very useful for me to ask them, what is the question that you want me to answer? That is sort of the guiding thing, like, or even at the interview stage, when they're saying, well, we want you to do this. And I would say, okay, but what is really the question that you want me to answer? And that helps, at least in my mind, kind of fine tune what I should be working on and what I should not be working on.
Do you find we were talking about the adversarial position that you're put in? Do you find that the other side is trying to impeach your experience in a way that you have to really, really remember every last little detail of everything you've ever said in your entire career, so you don't, accidentally contradict something that you may have said or changed your opinion on?
That's a great point. Obviously, you can't remember everything. You try certainly the report that you just provided in this particular matter, you want that to be fresh, maybe even physically in front of you so that you
Sure.
can refer to it. I have learned that if you're asked about something, even if you don't, especially if you don't have a full recollection of it or you haven't looked at it recently, I mean, you can look at it. You can ask them, okay, you're saying I said this. I want to see the full document, not just a sentence that you're saying I said. I want to see the full document. I want to see the document context. And I've learned that you can take your time. So normally you would say, okay, there's all these lawyers, they're all looking at me. I should try to be sort of knocking off responses as quickly as possible, like I'm doing now, right? But in Rally, what you need to be doing is you need to pause. You need to think very carefully about what they're challenging you on, right? Like, oh, you said A now, but didn't you in 1993 say not A? And then you need to sort of try to answer that question as honestly but as simply as possible, right? Without elaboration. But I've definitely had a few cases where they've pulled up stuff from my past. It'll be for example, I was on a patent matter and I've had my own patents. And so they pulled up my own patents and they, again, hundreds of pages, and they're trying to ask me questions about very specific lines. And, I just try to answer as clearly as I can. The other thing is, sometimes you'll get asked the same question again and again because they don't like the answer. Normally, right, if you ask me the same question again and again, I think what I would do is I would be responsive to that and I would try to give you the answer in a different way. You're saying, well, no, but again, in those kind of situations, again, it's not a normal conversation. And if you've given an answer and you get asked the same question, you give the same answer. You know what I mean? And
Right.
Even if they ask you 10 times because they really don't like your answer, that is their answer.
So that's one of the techniques that they use to try and trip you up. How do you, just in general, how do you keep your cool on the stand?
I certainly don't take it personally. I think I'm sure there's no reason to. I'm there as a technical expert. I stick to the truth and I stick to the facts as I understand them. And I feel like that kind of puts me on firm ground. If there's ever a situation where they seem to be making it seem like I've been inconsistent, well, again, I was always trying to be truthful, and therefore that inconsistency probably derives from context. Or maybe I misspoke at one point. So I think
Sure.
that keeps me comfortable where I'm like, stick to what you know. Don't talk, really careful, and don't talk about what you don't know. And what's that? It's like that expression, like if you only tell if you always tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything. Like it's sort of like only if you're lying do you really need to kind of
Right.
keep things straight a little bit. But as long as you're kind of calling it like it is, to the extent you obviously within the limitations of this adversarial relationship with the other lawyer. But yeah, I have not had an issue keeping my cool. I have had issues where the other lawyer seems to start losing his patience with me. But
Well, that's good for your side though, right?
yeah, I would imagine that, and the other lawyer starts to, again, one example would be where the lawyer just kept asking me the same question again and again. And I was just like, I'm not going to give you another answer. You know what I mean? You can ask me, I understand how this works, and I don't, I'm not going to keep giving you different answers until you get the answer that you want, right? I've given you what I think is the
Sure.
correct answer.
Uh, do you have any, do you have a story or two about, I don't know, a time where your role as an expert was somehow pivotal to the case or even changed the way that you approach expert witnessing in general?
I mean, I think I've learned stuff from every situation. I think that I know I was in one matter where I was sort of required to sit down for this was like a video deposition, and I was required to sit down for 7 hours, and this was a very sort of nasty matter between these two parties. And you could tell they were or at least were pretending very aggressive with one another. And one of the
Sure.
instructions I was given was, to just take my time, and that, you're basically on the clock for 7 hours. And it's not about rattling off responses as quickly as possible. It's listening to the question very carefully, asking to see the materials that you need to see. And honestly, if they were asking me about a document that was 10 pages and I hadn't looked at it in a decade, I would ask to see the document, and it's going to take me like 15 minutes to read it. And you have
Sure.
to, as an expert, not feel bad, not feel bad that I mean, this isn't this is not in front of a judge, but just as far as taking like this deposition, you have to take the time that you need and go through it, everyone's staring at you, right? Everyone is staring at you, but
Right,
you need to
right.
take the time that you need, and not rush into something, and give an answer. And those are, I guess that's one situation where, again, that's sort of a lesson that you learn. However, I was involved in another matter where I guess you could say the stakes were smaller. I think the lawyers even like knew each other. And so I came into this deposition with much less training. Um, and again, I was being asked questions, and I was trying to be as slow and steady as possible. But then I quickly understood that, I think everyone just wanted to go home, and they just sort of wanted to get certain answers on the record, so they could be home in time to, I don't know what, you know what I mean, play ball with their kids. So I guess there
Right.
are, situational cues, is what I learned, and that you need to, as an expert witness, understand the expectations for in each situation.
Read the room, as it were.
Yeah, read the room. Yeah.
Let's pivot to ethics for a moment. Have you ever felt any amount of kind of undue pressure to express your view as an expert in a way that you don't necessarily agree with, or word something in a way that you wouldn't really word it?
I felt, at least in the matters I've worked with, the lawyers knew that I was the most useful to them when I was speaking from like a position of strength and a position that I was comfortable with. And so,
Okay.
at least, I know that's universal, but I've been when they're working with me, and they're preparing me, they don't want me to say something I don't believe in. They don't want me to say something that I cannot, adamantly support. And so, at least in the matters that I've been worked on, and the expectations that I've had on me, they want me to be ethical, and to stick to the facts. But again, I think that the people who are hiring you will tell you what are the questions that they want you to work on, right? So you're not
Right.
investigating, everything. You're not writing a book on the topic, and so, they
Sure.
will ask you to address, very specific questions, and in that sense, you are working for them, and you're trying to provide, an answer to those particular questions. Of course, often they hope for a certain answer, right? But what you can do, you do the work, and you give them an honest opinion. I feel like sometimes when I'm giving them an answer that wasn't exactly what they wanted to hear, that helped them, refine their strategy. I said, I don't, I think it's not clear in this case. It's not exactly the way you said it. And I think in those kind of situations, they took it well, and they slightly revised their strategy, and allowed me then to answer a slightly different question from a position of higher strength. And again, my experience is the lawyers, they always want to hear, they want to hear from the expert witness the facts. They want to hear the truth so that they can build on it. They don't want to be blindsided because, their expert told them what they wanted to hear, and that the other expert is saying that it's completely wrong. I haven't
Sure.
had that situation.
And I suppose that comes down to preparation, right? You want to find out these things before you end up saying it in a courtroom, something that they might, think that you're going to say A to, but you end up saying B in front of a judge or a jury when they could have sussed that out during the preparation process to, as you said, put you in a position of strength.
Yeah, that now that you mention it, then has been my experience that usually with the kind of preparation I've gone through, um, you see the questions coming for the most part. You know what I mean? You know the kind of topics that, at least topic wise, the topics they're going to be asking you on. You know the issue, the wedge issues that they're going to be probing you on. And so, yeah, with preparation, you tend to understand why they're asking you something, right? Often there's been situations where obviously there's been prior experts, prior testimony, and you've reviewed that, and those have generated new issues, and again, you see those questions coming. And so, yeah, I agree. There is a level of preparation, which again is not, it's not coaching you what to say. It's coaching you to know that, these are the kind of questions that are coming, and this is what they mean when they're asking you that question. And based on that, what is the correct, truthful answer.
Before we wrap up, there's a couple questions I like to ask all of my interviewees. The first of which is, how important is winning to you? Is it important to you that your side prevails?
It's really, I guess I do want to provide value. Like I want it to be good. right? And so I don't know. There's a
Sure.
lot. I've been in situations where I've worked on something and I know it settles, and I don't even know what the settlement was at the end of the day, right? I'm not necessarily privy to how the matter
Yes.
was settled. So I don't know, did I win or do I lose? I like to think that if it's the right fit for me, for the right case, I can be good at it and I can provide them good value and in that way strengthen their case. Um, but it's interesting. I'm rare. Often I don't. You don't see the end of it. Like you are as an expert witness involved when you are involved, but you're not. But you're
Sure.
not there in the room. You know what I mean? When the judge makes the final decision, you're not around when um um the lawyers negotiate the settlement in the back room.
Sure.
Sometimes you hear intermediary decisions like, okay, there was a particular argument that they wanted you to support, and the judge has not accepted that argument. So there is now a setback. But even then, what can you do? Like you're an expert, you speak to the facts of the matter.
Sure.
You're not and what a judge decides at the end of the day, or an arbitrator. Yeah, so I guess I don't I wouldn't necessarily feel bad, but I want to be I want to be good at what I do.
Sure. Does that calculus enter into deciding whether or not you take on a case or not? In other words, when a lawyer or a lawyer's representative calls you and tells you about a case that you could potentially be an expert on, do you think about it in terms of will will I be able to add something that makes it more likely that they will prevail? Is that important?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. You could also ask it like, do I even agree with them? Right? They may
Right.
say, "Hey, we want to make this argument." You know what I mean? And you're saying, "Well, I don't even agree with that argument." So I guess something we started this thing with that initial sort of vetting process, and maybe not at that initial vetting process, but sort of very early on in the process, they're going to want to evaluate your, whatever your hot take, right,
Sure.
on the matter, right, to get your initial tell of what's going on. Um, Based on that, they like I said, they may, if they don't like what you say, they may change their strategy, or as far as I know, they may drop you, right, and not
Sure.
use you further on the matter. Um, and so I'm sorry that I guess the question was, do you feel so it's sort of I would say the ball was in their court, I guess, as if I'm understanding.
Okay.
I mean, you're telling them how you're calling it as you see it. Um, and just like the decision whether you have the right expertise or not, the ball is in their court as far as how far they want to proceed. Um, with you, and again, I've had situations where maybe my role has been diminished. I've had other situations where the case was large and I've taken on additional roles, right? So they as I was working on one aspect of it, they said, "Hey, there's something else. Can you look into it?" And then as I was looking into it, they realized that I could provide value there as well.
Sure.
And so I guess, and again, I don't know, I can't read their mind, but um, I certainly haven't been in a situation where I've like been like at odds with the lawyers I'm working, or arguing with them. I mean, it was their decision to engage me, and they can stop at any point. You know.
Do you turn down a significant number of engagements?
Um, no, in fact, I think there's been very few. And again, I think, but I have been turned down myself. So you know what I mean.
Sure.
I would say that perhaps that's where the vetting process happens. Where first of all, they're asking me what my level of expertise is, and if it's clearly out of
Right.
bounds, I don't need them to be the one to tell them. It's obvious,
Right.
right? That becomes very clear. Or if they want to take the matter in a direction that I don't think makes logical sense, then again, I would be sort of I would sort of be I would be disqualifying myself, and then it'd be. I always feel like it's their decision not to move. It sounds like a dating thing, but it's it's them. It's not me. They're the ones who kind of walk away. Yeah, it's usually not me at all.
One
But
other
also,
thing that I
think
like
about
to ask.
they're paying for your
Go on.
time, right? So I mean, they're paying
Sure.
for my time. If they want me to spend a certain amount of time on something and tell them what I think, uh, then they're compensating me for my time. It's not necessarily something that you know, um, it seems why wouldn't I want to do that? You know what I mean? If it's worthwhile for me, they're the ones who have to consider the bigger picture of what's the value that I bring.
That's a perfect segue into compensation. Do you take a retainer? Do you do a project-based approach? How do you prefer to bill?
I bill for most matters on a hourly basis, simply because that you don't know, it's something might be 5 hours or something might be 100 hours, and this way it's sort of really fair, and similarly, if they ask you for one thing, but then they start asking you for something else, no, it's fine, you're paying by the hour. So if it's going to be project based, there has to be like a really clear defined deliverable with like well-defined
Sure.
borders on it up front, so there isn't like creep on scope, or conversely they feel like you haven't gone. So I think hourly is almost always how I work. Projects, I consult sort of more on things related to product development, and there maybe, but not so much on legal matters. As far as retainer, I will usually not. I mean, I think especially if you're dealing with like a large, well-known law firm,
Sure.
um, I haven't had issues with, I mean, what you take a retainer because you're worried about payment. I think if someone is working with a smaller or an independent lawyer and they have some concerns, I think it's very reasonable to ask for a retainer, which is conventionally less than how much they think, you're overall going to be charging them. So there isn't really a reason for them to hesitate to give it to you.
Sure.
Payment experts should know often you're dealing with the lawyers, but it's coming from the client. And so there is that barrier. That barrier can introduce some delays. I would pay attention in your agreements, whether it is the lawyers or the client who is ultimately responsible to pay you, right? So if it's the lawyers, and they're saying, well, we have to pay you in, net 30 days, then even if the client is not paying them, they have to come through, you know what I mean? Whereas if it's a client who's responsible, they're essentially forwarding your invoice onto the client. There's usually like a vaguer understanding that it's like 30 to 60 days. But you're never interfacing directly with the client. And so there's that extra gap. But again, I've never seen that be an issue when I'm dealing with sort of established law firms.
Do you have any last advice for experts, in particular newer experts or attorneys?
I would say, to the academics who maybe are somehow hearing this and have not had the opportunity to work as experts, or have had very limited experience, and are not sure if they want to expand on it, I really think that it is a wonderful opportunity to like expand your horizon from, let's say, your academic bubble, to work with different people, to work on challenging problems, to challenge yourself in different ways. And I have found the process, intellectually rewarding and enjoyable. So I guess I would encourage people to look at it, to look for those opportunities, and to make themselves available.
That's excellent advice. Thank you so much, Professor Bikson, for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to our listeners so much for joining me here for another discussion at the Roundtable. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Discussions at Roundtable. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com. Subscribe today on Apple Podcasts or your favorite listening apps.